Shabbat Shalom. Mazel Tov, Alana, beautiful job. And you really did capture the essence of the Torah reading and some very important messages, especially about Lot's wife, which generally she's seen as almost a villain, but you really captured a more human essence for her, and that was enormously important. So thank you so much. Bit of a squeak. The Torah portions over the last 2 weeks, last week and this week, have been interesting. We learn about Abraham and Sarah, and we see their journey from Haran, from Ur, all the way to Eretz Yisrael, as they begin a new part of their lives in a land that God showed them, where they dwelled among a diverse population. And we saw the challenges of that last week, as Abraham ends up fighting in a war, but he also ends up rescuing hostages. And these are important messages indeed, especially at a time like now, as we look at a very difficult world. But this week, we see a very different side of Abraham, maybe to some degree a hopeful sign, as we think of Abraham and how he challenges the world and challenges God. But interestingly, we see that he's not exactly perfect. And maybe that's a relief. Because if Abraham were perfect, then none of us would be able to live up to Abraham. None of us would be able to be that good. And yet, Abraham sometimes rises to heights and sometimes to depths. So we see the good, the bad, and the ugly, which all of us contain. None of us are perfect. And Alana, as you become an adult, sometimes it seems like everybody expects an adult to be perfect. You were a kid, now you're an adult, now you have to get everything right, but you don't. Instead, it's still a work in progress, and even those of us who are significantly older are still in a work in progress. We're still trying to do the best we can. We're still trying to rise to those heights, sometimes succeeding and sometimes not. So the model that we want is Abraham and Sarah when they do their best, but realize that it's only a model, something to look up to, but to realize that they too make mistakes. And the important thing when we make mistakes is to learn from them so that we don't repeat them in the future, but it's always to do our best. And that's the wish we have for you, that you'll be doing your best, and we know you will. You did a wonderful job today, showing a tremendous amount of work. I don't know if your friends know how much work it is to become a bat mitzvah, but it takes months and months and months of really hard work. This is a great accomplishment, something you should be very proud of. And in our Parsha, Abraham shows especially the heights that a human being can reach to. And I'm really struck by the passage you talked about early on in your Devar Torah, where you referred to Abraham challenging God when God determined to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And there, Abraham says to God, shouldn't the God who creates justice do justice? And that's a real challenge, and God hears that voice. I think that's actually what God wanted Abraham to say, and he was waiting, or God was waiting for it, but it's something we all need to hear, and we all need to be willing to challenge and say, shouldn't the God of justice do justice? Shouldn't we in our world try our best to make a world of justice, even though the world is very difficult, the world is far from perfect, yet we should be willing to challenge and try to make a better world. L'takein olam b'malchut Shaddai, to improve the world through a process of tikkun olam, where we're partners in God in that repair, and we take that responsibility seriously. And there are going to be times when you want to challenge your parents and say, shouldn't my parents who gave us justice or gave me this idea of justice do justice? Because sometimes even parents make mistakes. And you're going to look at your teachers and your friends. But always if you have this idea of justice in your mind, only as long as we have justice in our minds as the goal of the kind of world that we want to live in, where everybody can live in peace, where everybody has enough, then that's a great model. And challenging and trying to make your voice heard is a great thing to do, because that's how we improve. when people challenge. Now, of course, when we challenge each other, we're not always going to agree. Sometimes your parents are going to say, you may think this is unjust, but you still have to do your homework. Sometimes life is like that. We may not always agree. And the important thing for parents, the important thing for young people, and the important thing for all of us is to realize that we all are doing our best trying to make a better world. And if we listen and respect each other in our different answers, then perhaps a better world can be created. Because if we can live together in peace by willing to hear each other instead of demanding that we're right and everybody else is wrong, then perhaps we can create a world where people can live in peace. So Abraham reminds us of that, and this is the first time that we have such a challenge, but it's not going to be the last time, and it's something that we all need to do. And in our Parsha, we see a whole lot of other examples about Abraham standing up and doing things, not always because they're difficult, but doing them because they're right. So we see him standing up to God, but we also see him as a man who exemplifies the idea of hospitality. We see him as the man who really realizes that we have to recognize and see the humanity in everyone as we create and live in a world together. So at the very beginning of the Parsha, before the section we read that Abraham is visited by some men, and he rushes along with Sarah and his family to make them feel at home, to welcome them into their tent. And according to the rabbis, Abraham's tent was special. It had 4 openings, one on each side. And that way, Abraham could see people from wherever they were coming. And whenever he saw anybody, whoever they were, he rushed to offer them hospitality. And that Haknasat Orchim is one of the important mitzvot that we need to really push in our lives, to welcome everyone as our guests, and to see the common humanity in everyone and make them feel part of our community, part of what is important. And it's interesting, in your Dvar Torah, you talked about Lot and his welcoming of guests. And the rabbis note there's something very different about what happens with Abraham and what happens with Lot. Though I don't want to say anything bad about Lot. Abraham sees men and he welcomes them into his tent. Lot sees angels and he offers them hospitality. So the rabbis wonder, if Lot had only seen human beings, would he have offered the same level of hospitality? But our model is Avraham, that we see the common humanity in everyone, and we offer hospitality to whoever needs it. We welcome people into our community wherever they can be found. And it's interesting, Rabbi Roller picked up on this idea of common humanity in the Dvar Torah that he sent out yesterday, where he talked about a very troubling incident in our Parsha, where Sarah determines to kick Ishmael and his mother Hagar out of the camp. And Rabbi Roller noted that perhaps one of the things that led to Sarah's jealousy was that Sarah saw the common humanity and also the common family that was Ishmael and Isaac. They were half-brothers, yet they were brothers, and Sarah saw that and worried. And that's something of an important message for us as we look at the world as it can be in the future. It's not there yet. When we see the brother and sisterhood, the common humanity, the idea that we are all brethren. And even where there are horrible conflicts, we need to see that and realize common humanity and not vilify the other, but try to still see them as human beings. That's always a challenge, but it's hugely important because there can't be peace unless all of us recognize our common humanity. And of course, in the Torah, as the rabbis understand it, Ishmael becomes the father of Islam, as Isaac becomes the father of the Jewish people. And it's very important to note that genetic studies of Palestinians in the West Bank has shown that they and we both descend from the peoples of the community. Both they and we are indigenous to the land. And therefore, it's only when we recognize and see each other as humans and maybe as family, which is very hard right now, but something that will only create peace if we can do it in the future. If we can see that, maybe someday there'll be peace in the Middle East. It's a wish, it's a hope. And in fact, in our Parashat today, there's a model of that. Last week, we read of war. As Abraham, and actually the whole community of the land of Canaan, fought back against outsiders who were swooping in. But this week, we see something different. Abraham meets with Abimelech, not once but twice. The first time a bit iffy, because that's the time when he pretends that Sarah is his sister rather than his wife. But he meets twice, and they create covenants with each other. And maybe that's a model for the future, when people learn to create covenants with each other instead of fighting each other. Fulfilling the words in the Psalms, Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Behold how beautiful it is when brethren can sit down in peace. And we're all actually brethren, every human being. So that needs to be the model that we aim for. It needs to be the model we work for, even at times of horror, even at times where we are angry. We still need to remember that we're all part of one human family. It's a challenge, but it's something that's necessary if ever we'll be able to live together in peace, if ever the Middle East will be transformed. And obviously it has to come from everyone in the Middle East, but the feelings, at least, and the realization has to start somewhere. So Lana, this Torah portion that you've talked about has set up really great expectations for you. You're going to make peace in the... No. But it does set up expectations for you and all of us to take responsibility for our lives and to make the mitzvot that we do shape the world. Anne Frank, just a few weeks before she died, talked about how she looked at the horrors of the... Well, actually not before she died, but before she was captured. She wrote in her diary that she looked at the world and she saw the horrors that were overtaking millions. And yet, she said, even so, I need to follow my ideals and remember them, because one day, perhaps, I can live by them. And she meant by living by them, live by them in the outside world, live for all to see. And that's a challenge for us, too, in the times of horror, to remember our ideals, to remember the challenges that Abraham made to God, to remember our common humanity, and say, someday, maybe all of us can live by these ideals. Someday, we can live in peace. Shabbat Shalom.